Before we start this video, do like and subscribe to our channel and not miss on any updates.
Okay, so today we are going to discuss in a few case studies and we are going to discuss the economic laws question from those case studies. So economic laws basically comprise of FEMA, FCRA, SEBI, LODR regulations and other regulations, and it also has insolvency and bankruptcy code. So we'll deal with questions related to all of these topics. So our mode of approach in order to solve these questions would be we'll first have a look at the question and then the relevant part of the case study which relates to the question. We'll have a look at the section or the rule which relates to the question and then we'll solve the question. Okay, so let's start with the first case study for the day, which is case study number 2. So this is case study 2, a very long case study as you might see. However, we'll first have a look at the question which deals with the relevant economic law, and then we'll come to the relevant part of the case study and read what it says. Okay. So here's question number 4 from this case study, which deals with FEMA, which is your Foreign Exchange Management Act. Let's have a look at what the question says. So it says, enumerate the legal requirements for the remittance of commission by SG India to Messrs Best Broker and recommend the most appropriate legal position to ensure compliance with relevant provisions of the Foreign Exchange Management Act. So here they basically want to know about some legal requirements with respect to remittance of commission. Now let's go to the relevant part of the case study and see what transaction is happening, for what purposes the commission has to be remitted. So here's the relevant part. It is a real estate transaction. What does it say? It says SG India holds a commercial plot in Mumbai, which it intends to sell to Messrs. Best Broker. So SG India, it is a company which has a commercial plot here in Mumbai, which it intends to sell to Messrs. Best Broker. Now, Best Broker is a real estate broker, and the head office of this broker is in the US. So the sale is being done to a person resident outside India. Has been appointed by SG India to find some suitable buyers for the said commercial plot in Chennai, which is situated at a prime location. So Messrs. Best Broker, what they do is they identify Legacy Estate Inc., which is again based out of US, as a potential buyer. So Best Broker, this firm is a broker. Legacy Estate Inc., this is the buyer. Now both are from outside India, both are from USA. It is to be noted that Legacy Estate Inc. is controlled from India and hence is a person resident in India. However, they have clarified that since Legacy Estate Inc. it is being controlled from India, it is a person resident in India under FEMA. So deal is finalized and Legacy Estate Inc. purchases the commercial plot for 7 lakh USD. So it is 7 lakh US dollars. According to the agreement, SG India is required to pay commission at the rate of 7%. So the rate of commission which has been decided upon is 7% of the sale proceeds, which means 7% of 7 lakh dollars. So Messrs. Best Broker for arranging the sale of the commercial plot to Legacy Inc. and commission is to be remitted in USD to head office in the US. So the commission has to be remitted where? Commission has to be remitted outside India. So does anyone know the provision related to remittance of commission under FEMA, or as per FEMA, what happens when there's an agent abroad and there's sale of residential flats which is happening, or commercial property? Any idea, anyone? Any idea of the percentage or the amount? No? Okay, fine. So let's have a look at the relevant provision. So here's the relevant provision here. So commission, which is being paid to agents who are situated abroad for any sale of residential flats or commercial plots in India. So in the given situation, the sale is happening of a commercial plot which is situated here in India, and the sale is being done by an agent which has its head office in the US. Up to USD 25,000 or 5% of the inward remittance, whichever is less. So they've told you that commission per transaction which is being made to the agents abroad, for what? For the purpose of sale of any residential property here in India. Now they have given you certain limits. What are the limits which have been given? It says 25,000 or 5% of the inward remittance. Sorry, it should be whichever is more, not whichever is less. So in this particular situation, you tell me what will be 5% of 7 lakh USD? 5% of 7 lakh USD. 35,000 US dollars. Yes. Now, what is the commission in the given situation? We saw that 7% of 7 lakh dollars is the commission which is being decided upon. So 49,000 US dollars is the commission which is being remitted in the given situation, right or wrong? So it says, what is the total amount of commission which is being remitted? 49,000. However, the limit prescribed is 25,000 or 35,000. That is 5% of 7 lakh dollars, whichever is more. So your more is 35,000. However, the commission which is being rendered is 49,000, which is higher than 35,000 US dollars. So in this given situation, the person will have to obtain prior approval from the Reserve Bank of India. So wherever commission, remittance of commission is being done to agents abroad, then in that situation, and if this remittance is being done by a person other than individual. So here this is a company, SD India is a company who is doing the remittance. Yes or no? Who is paying commission here? It is a company, it is not an individual. So wherein a person other than an individual is making remittance, then prior approval of Reserve Bank of India has to be obtained. And for remittance of the commission, where the amount is exceeding 25,000 or 5% of the commission, or 5% of the commission which is being remitted, whichever is more. So here the commission amount is 49,000. So which means prior approval of the Reserve Bank of India has to be obtained in this situation. So did you understand what the provision is? Can we go back to the question and give the answer? Yes. So let's go back to the question. So here's the question. So again, they are asking you what are the legal requirements with respect to remittance of commission by SD India. So the first option says there's no requirement of obtaining prior permission of Reserve Bank of India. So is this correct? No, this is not correct. Second, again says that no requirement of obtaining prior permission. Again, this is not the correct option. Moving on. Third option also says that there's no requirement of obtaining the prior permission of the Reserve Bank of India. So which means the correct answer is option D. However, let's see what option D says. It says it is mandatory to obtain prior permission of Reserve Bank of India for the remittance of entire commission of 49,000 by SD India to Messrs Best Broker. However, if the commission amount would have been say $20,000 only, then in that situation was prior permission required? In that situation, if the amount of remittance would have been only 20,000, so in that situation, would prior permission be required? No, in that permission, prior permission would not be required from RBI. Here, what the provision says, when the commission exceeds 25,000 US dollar or 5% of the of the inward remittance, whichever is more, then in that situation, the prior approval of RBI is required. So in this situation, if the amount would have been only 20,000 US dollars, it is less than 35,000. Whichever is more, we evaluated whichever is more. So it was 35,000, 5% of the commission which is being remitted. So in this situation, if the remittance would have been 20,000, then no requirement of prior permission would have existed. Did you understand it?
Is it clear now?
Yes, ma'am.
So since it is less than 25,000, so you don't see 25,000 only. We first evaluate the threshold limit. It can either be 25,000 or 5% of the remittance which is being done, whichever is more. That will be the threshold limit in order to obtain permission. If the commission amount is more than the threshold limit, then permission has to be mandatorily obtained. If it is lesser than the threshold limit, then in that situation, permission is not required. Clear? Shall we move ahead? I hope
Yes,
this is
ma'am.
clear.
Yes, ma'am.
So moving on to the next case study. So this case study had only one question with respect to economic laws. Moving on to case study number 4, which is Becky Bond India Limited. So this is again a company. Now let's have a look at the questions in this case study. Now sometimes what happens is you don't actually have to read the entire case study in order to answer the questions, and you will see this for this case study. So you see the first MCQ here. It asks you, by what time should Becky Bond India Limited submit financial results for the quarter ending September to the stock exchange? So again, this is as per the SEBI LODR regulations. The question is very simple. It is direct question. Now, if you know the limits, if you know what are the number of days required or what is the limit, then it becomes very easy for you to answer the question. So does anyone know how many days from the end of the quarter the financial results shall be submitted to the stock exchange? Any idea, anyone? Is it 30 days, 40 days, 45 days, 60 days? Any idea? No idea?
No, ma'am. No idea, ma'am.
Okay, so this is as per regulation 33 of SEBI LODR regulations, which says that submission of financial results should happen within 45 days from the end of the quarter, other than the last quarter. Which means what? Now tell me, what are the quarter ends? Can you tell me what are the different quarters which happen in one financial year? What will be the first quarter ending?
June,
June, right. Then the second quarter would be
September,
September. Third quarter,
December, and March.
December, and last quarter would be March. So March is the closing date. March would be the closing quarter of the year, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So in this situation, they are filing financial results for the second quarter, September quarter, right? So here the financial results will have to be submitted within how many days? Within 45 days from the end of the quarter. Is this the last quarter?
No.
This is not the last quarter. So what will be the correct answer here? Which option is the correct one?
Second.
Please read the options correctly. Set 45 days
Sorry,
from
third.
the end of
C.
the quarter.
Quarter. C.
Yes. Now here in this situation, if the quarter would have been March quarter, then this 45 days limit would not have applied, because this 45 days limit is applicable only to all the quarters except the last quarter. It is because March is the year ending date and it takes time to finalize the entire year's result. Understood?
Okay.
So
what
this
is
45
what is the limit for the March quarter?
for March, it is when you submit in your financial statements.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So understood this?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Moving on to the second question. Now, this is again a direct question. Which of the following is an unpublished price-sensitive information as per SEBI Prohibition of Insider Trading Regulation 2015? So the question is saying you that which of the following is an unpublished price-sensitive information? Option A is financial results. Option B, changes in finance and accounts team. Option C, significant improvement of business of an immaterial subsidiary. So it is immaterial subsidiary, doesn't make any difference. Option D, submitting annual report to stock exchange. So you just think and tell me which of these would be the most price sensitive information. If someone comes to know about this, then yes, he knows a lot of price sensitive insider information. Which of these would that be?
And more sensitive would be financial results only.
Financial results would be more sensitive.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Anyone else has any other thing in mind? No? So as you see, all the information which has been given here. Now, if it is about changes in finance and accounts team, now changes in finance and account team will not have any impact on the price of the shares, you have a price of the stock in the market. Or if even if it is not published, then there's no problem. And talking of improvement in business of an immaterial subsidiary, it is an immaterial subsidiary. The subsidiary is not having any impact at all. Then again, it doesn't make any difference. And again, submitting of annual report to stock exchange, that is also not making any difference here. So the correct option here is financial results. So the most unpublished price sensitive information as per SEBI is financial results. Some clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Moving on to the next question. So Becky Bond India Limited had the start in the quarter with listing of it with 5 investor complaints. So in the start of the quarter, how many investor complaints were there? There were 5. During the quarter, it received 15 new complaints. So there were 15 new complaints which were received during the quarter. And by the end of the quarter, they resolved 12 complaints. So 12 complaints were resolved. Determine how many investor complaints remain unresolved. So you have to calculate how many complaints are unresolved. So can someone give me the answer to this? This is a simple mathematical question. How many are unresolved?
Ma'am, is it 8?
Yes.
5 plus
So
15 minus
start
12.
there were 5, 15 more, which makes total number 20. And out of 20, 12 were resolved,
18.
which means 8
8.
complaints are
Right.
still unresolved. Direct, straightforward question, right? Any difficulty till now?
No, ma'am.
No.
All the questions are easy.
Yes.
I think you did a typo. It is not 18, it is 8. Right? Moving on to the next question. The next question again based on SEBI regulations. So as per SEBI LODR regulations, company must submit its quarterly compliance report on corporate governance. So every company is required to submit a compliance report on corporate governance on a quarterly basis. The quarter ended on 31st March. By which date should it submit its compliance report? So any idea of when the compliance report has to be submitted? Any idea of the number of days? No idea. So it is 21 days from the end of the quarter when the compliance report has to be submitted. And this is even in case of last quarter. This is compliance report on corporate governance. Corporate governance basically means that how the things are happening in an organization, whether the things are happening in a proper manner or not. So what would be the due date of submitting the compliance report for the quarter ended 31st March?
21st April?
21st of April, because that is 21 days from the end of the quarter. And since the quarter is ending on 31st of March, the deadline would be 21st of April. And this is given in regulation 27 of SEBI LODR regulations. Clear? Is this clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Moving on, the next question from economic laws is question number 6. Now, when should Becky Bond Limited submit its shareholding pattern statement to the recognized stock exchange? So again, they are asking a question that when should they submit their shareholding pattern statement to the recognized stock exchange? So any idea of number of days, how many number of days would happen here? Anyone?
No idea, ma'am.
No idea. So there's a regulation 31 of SEBI regulation. So which says that the company, if a company is a listed company, and we've seen starting में that this company is a listed company, they must submit their shareholding pattern statement within 10 days of any capital restructuring, if any, which is happening. So we'll have to go to the case study here, look at the case study and see if there's any capital restructuring happening in this particular situation. So what was the date of listing of company? The company was listed on 28th of September. This is the date when the company was listed. Now let's see if there's any change which has happened. So they've given you details of profit before tax. And this is the format for the financial results. Now, Becky Bond Limited also established a grievance redressal mechanism to address investor complaints. It mandated the filing of a statement dealing with these complaints and the other corporate governance requirements and the submission of quarterly statements to the stock exchange covering matters related to public issues, right issues, preferential issues in November 20. Now let's see what are the other changes happening in the company. So they had to expand their business in Pune, expand business in South Mumbai. So is this relevant for our question? Is this information relevant for our question?
No, not required.
Is this relevant changing of, expansion of business here and there?
No,
Will
for
this be
this
relevant for
question,
us to answer the question of the last question which we are seeing as of now?
no, not required.
Not required. So what information will you use in this particular situation in order to answer the question? So let's read the entire case study and see what information is useful and what information is not useful. Okay.
What is the regulation number?
Regulation for the last one,
Yes.
31.
Yes, ma'am. But in ICI material, they are given us 7 days, madam.
Sorry.
In ICI material,
Uh-huh.
they are given us 7 days. 7
They
working
might have
days.
not updated it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, ma'am.
Okay. I'll just share my screen for you to see the regulation.
Ma'am, how to filter the information from the case study, because these are so long case studies.
Right, right. So when you get a case study like this, there are several informations in a case study which are not very useful. So we always suggest that you first read the question, and on the basis of the question, you go to the relevant part of this case study and then see whether the entire case study is relevant or not. So you will be able to see the relevant parts. See, for the first question, the FEMA question, it was a commission transaction, remittance of commission happening. So what we did, we directly went to the transaction, the type of transaction which was happening there. And on the basis of that, we decided, okay, fine, this is the relevant point here. And that is what we want for solving our question. So that's how you see the case study. You first read the question is what we advise always. Reading the question before you actually start solving it, it is advisable. Okay.
Okay, ma'am, because then we will have an idea that what is the
Yeah,
requirement.
because when you read the question first, you have an idea as to, okay, fine, these are the things which are happening. These are the things which have been mentioned in the case study. So on the basis of that, it also becomes easier for you to, okay, understand that, okay, fine, this information is relevant for me and this information is not relevant for me. Okay.
Okay, ma'am.
So the case study does not actually mention any detail on the date of any capital restructuring as in this particular situation. So we'll come back to this question again. It has to be 10 days from any capital restructuring, but there's no capital restructuring which has actually happened. Okay, we'll come back to the case study. Let's move on to the next case study now. It is case study number 7, which is Connect Group. And there's only one question based on economic laws in this, and the question is based on insolvency and bankruptcy code. So let's have a look at question number 6. So question number 6 says, given the provided facts, if the transaction involving Connect XG's sale of spectrum to Moonlink Telecom had occurred, comment on legal position regarding such a transaction under the insolvency and bankruptcy code. So for this, in order to answer this, we'll have to go to the case study and see what are the facts, and only on the basis of that we'll be able to answer the question. Now here it says the relevant part here is only this much, this last paragraph. However, we'll read a preceding paragraph also, so that you know that, okay, fine, the company has gone into insolvency. So despite its promissory start, CI's journey, which is Connect India's journey, was fraught with challenges that ultimately led to its decline. So though the company started very well, however, it later on started declining. Intense competition from both established players and disruptive entrants, coupled with rapid technological advancements, eroded CI's market share and profitability. So because of all of this, the market share and profitability of the company went down. Additionally, the company grappled with substantial debt burden, which was incurred during its expansion phase. So in order to expand the company, they took a lot of loan and there was a lot of debt burden on the company. Efforts to alleviate financial pressures through strategic partnership and merger attempts were thwarted by regulatory hurdles and internal disagreements. Now, when you read so much, what does all of this in one simple sentence talk of? It simply says that the company has now gone into bankruptcy. The company does not have sufficient funds. So if you read these entire 5-6 lines, which we have read till now, it is nothing but waste of time, because it is not giving you any additional information as such. It is only saying that the company couldn't do well later on. Okay, so this kind of information you should learn eliminating. You should not be reading this information again and again when you read the case study to solve your question. Now, in May 2019, CI succumbed to its financial woes and they filed for insolvency or for bankruptcy under the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. This marked the sobering end of once promising venture, etc., etc., so which is not again required. Now, by 2020, a consortium of companies bid over $250 million for CI's asset. Ultimately, Suhan Jain's Connect XD acquired these assets for 3,700 crores in 2021. So in 2021, another company acquired CI. This acquisition was a part of XD's broader strategy to consolidate its market position and expand its telecom infrastructure. As a part of this expansion, Connect XD acquired the right to use spectrum for high frequency bands on April 1st, 2020. So Connect XD, they acquired right to use spectrum for high frequency bands, and this was done on 1st of April 2020 by making an upfront payment of 1,000 crores. The spectrum was valid for a period of 20 years. In the previous year, 23-24, Connect XD transferred part of the spectrum for a consideration of 300 crores when 17 years was still remaining. So after using it for 3 years, they transferred the spectrum for 300 crores to someone else. After the spectrum was sold, there were news in the industry that Moonlink Telecom was interested in buying the spectrum sold for a whooping amount of 900 crores. So there's another company which was also interested in buying this spectrum and for 900 crores. However, there's a problem here. What problem? Moonlink Telecom was embroiled in a legal battle with government over disputed amount of 2,000 crores, complicating their potential acquisition. So what is the situation here? The company, Moonlink Telecom, wants to purchase the spectrum for 900 crores. However, there is already a legal battle going on between this company and the government, and the disputed amount there is 2,000 crores. Now, do you think it will be easy for Moonlink Telecom to acquire this spectrum or buy spectrum in this kind of situation where a legal battle is still going on? Is it easy?
No, it will not be easy.
No,
It
not
is
easy.
it is not easy, right? So let's have a look at the options and see what would be the correct option in the given situation. So the first option says, Connect XD's sale of spectrum for 300 crores is invalid as IBC requires that any transfer of asset must be done at fair value, which is closer to rupees 900 in this case. So no, this is not the correct answer. Moonlink Telecom cannot purchase spectrum because they are involved in legal battle over a disputed amount, which disqualifies them from acquiring the asset. So this can be a correct answer, but let's see the other points as well. The IBC 2016 does not have any direct provisions regarding sale of spectrum. Thus, the sale by Connect will be valid irrespective of Moonlink Telecom's interest. So, do you think this is a correct answer? Do you
No,
think
ma'am.
this seems to be a correct answer? No, this doesn't seem to be a correct answer as well. Now, option D says Moonlink Telecom can purchase the spectrum if they resolve the legal dispute with the government and prove their financial stability under the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. Again, this also seems to be a correct answer. Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
So now there's a confusion. Option B also seems correct, and option D also seems correct. Now you tell me which is the correct option. Option
D,
B
ma'am.
also seems correct, and
B.
option D also seems correct. So which one would be the correct option?
Option D, madam.
Sorry?
Option D.
Option D. Okay, I want the
Because
others
since
also.
Ma'am, and the B, I think the B would be the correct answer.
B would be the correct answer because D, it will require time for Moonlink to
Moonlink to establish financial stability.
yeah. So I
Okay.
think B is correct.
So there are two people who think B is correct. There's one person who thinks D is correct.
because since there is a dispute between the Moonlink and government not allow the Moonlink to purchase the spectrum.
Hmm.
So if they want to purchase it, they have to resolve the dispute between them and the government. Then only they can purchase.
Right. They can purchase it only if they resolve the dispute. Now, tell me one thing. The primary objective of IBC, that is the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code,
Mhm.
it is not to, declare companies insolvent, or it is not to completely declare companies bankrupt. The
Mhm.
main intention behind IBC is resolution of the process. They do not want to liquidate and wind up all the companies. They want to resolve the process. They want to try and solve the insolvency position of all the companies, whichever company is in whichever company is in question. So IBC primarily aims with resolution of insolvency. Their aim is not to declare everyone insolvent, but rather to resolve the insolvency position and the bankruptcy position. And it also ensures that all the assets are being managed in an efficient manner, right? So in this particular situation, if Moonlink can resolve all the ongoing legal issues, and if it can show that they are capable and they are stable of purchasing that spectrum, then in that situation it would align with IBC's objective that insolvency and other stakeholders protection is happening, and all the buyers, the person who's buying the asset, is financially stable. So what happens is, whenever IBC comes into picture, the main intention here is to resolve the process. And even if there's any sale of asset happening, then the asset should be sold to a buyer who's financially stable. So Moonlink here will have to prove that it is financially stable, and also it'll have to resolve all its legal dispute, and only then Moonlink can purchase the spectrum. So in the given situation, the correct answer would be option D. This is the most appropriate answer. I agree that option B also seems appropriate in this situation because there's some legal battle going on, and when someone is in a legal battle, they cannot purchase the assets. However, option D is more appropriate than option B. And that's the reason why option D is the correct answer. Understood? Is this clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So it is the
Yes.
main intention of the act is resolution of disputes. So if the if Moonlink can resolve the legal disputes and prove their financial stability, then for sure they can purchase the spectrum. Clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Now
Yes, ma'am.
let's move on to the next case study. This case study number 15. Now this case study has questions based on FCRA. You all know FCRA? Have you studied FCRA? Yes or no?
No, ma'am.
No? Okay. So we'll again have a look at relevant provisions of FCRA and then answer the questions. Now here the first question is, Mr. X is worried that FCRA registration of trust is going to expire in year 2023 itself. Which of the following statements is most appropriate for renewal of registration of trust and receipt of foreign contributions under FCRA? Now, when we talk of FCRA, it is Foreign Contribution Regulation Act. Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, wherein some trusts or say non-government organizations or charitable institution, they receive contribution from foreign for the purpose of their activities. That is Foreign Contribution Regulation Act. However, whenever any trust is receiving any contribution like this, for this, they'll need to have appropriate registration. They should be eligible to receive those contributions. And for that, they'll have to get themselves registered under the FCRA Act. So let's have a look at the case study first, and then we'll come down and answer the question. So there's NGOs. NGOs are non-profit entities working independent of government. UN Department of Global Communication defines NGO as so and so. So this is only the meaning of NGO which has been given. So do you think this paragraph is relevant for us?
No.
Not relevant. So let's go to the next paragraph. So they say NGOs have become very influential, prominent in world affairs, and a substantial chunk of overseas development is routed through NGOs. Our country also has a long history of civil society movements. Again, although work being done by NGOs has been commendable. Do you think this is again relevant? Is this
No.
relevant for you to answer any questions?
No, ma'am.
No.
Not relevant at all. So we don't have to waste our time reading all of this irrelevant information. Moving on. So here it says foreign contributions in India regulated under the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act. So yes, we know that. The objective is to regulate the acceptance and utilization of foreign contribution or foreign hospitality by individuals or associations or company. So like I've told you that if there's any person who's receiving contribution for abroad for a specific objective, then he has to make sure that whether he's eligible to accept it, whether he's registered under FCRA, and whether he is utilizing the amount for the purpose for which he has obtained it. Moving on. DBS Trust is one such organization working in field of preserving ecology and environment. So this is a non-government organization. Name is DSB Trust. It has been working on environmental issues since last few years and very vocal and prominent. So it is a very good organization which has been working for environment and ecology. The office bearers of the trust met on 25th March 23 to take stock of situation arising from amendments to FCRA law and rules in recent past. So they met in order to see whether they comply with the rules and regulations of FCRA even now after the amendments. And one of the office bearers, Mr. X, he lamented, he said about the increased compliance and burden charges. He says there's a lot of compliance which has to be done now. He was also worried that FCRA registration is going to expire in a year, and modalities of renewing FCRA registration has also undergone a change. On closer perusal, he finds that FCRA registration of the trust is going to expire on 31st of December 23. So what is the date on which the registration is going to expire?
31st December.
31st December.
31st December 2023. Now let's go back to the first question and answer it. So this particular point says Mr. X is worried that the registration will expire. Which of the following statements is most appropriate regarding the renewal of registration? Now, first option is an application should be made by trust in September 23. Now, for this, we'll first have to look at the provision and then we'll answer the question. So the provision is it has to be made within 6 months before the
months.
expiry of, yes. So under Rule 12 of FCRA, application for renewal of certificate of registration shall be made in Form FC3 within 6 months before the expiry of registration. So when is the registration expiring here?
31st December
31st
31st
December.
December.
So 6 months before December would be June.
June.
30th June.
Yes. So an application should be made by the trust in the month of June electronically to online portal to FCRA services under Ministry of Home Affairs, and foreign contribution can only be received in an account designated as FCRA account, which has to be opened with designated branch of SBI New Delhi. So this is also mentioned in the regulation that the amount which you receive as foreign contribution, it has to be received only in an FCRA account, and that also has to be with a designated SBI branch at New Delhi. So this point is correct. Is the first point correct, that the application should be made in the month of June 23?
No, first is not correct. Second seems to be correct.
Why is first not correct?
Ma'am, because it is saying September to 2023, but you are
I
saying
am
that
talking of option B.
no, B seems to be correct, but A is wrong.
A is wrong. A is wrong. B seems to be correct. Let's read the next option. An application for renewal of certificate may be made by trust in June 23 electronically. And it says foreign contribution can only be received in an account designated as FCRA account of any scheduled of branch of any scheduled bank. So it cannot be any scheduled bank. It has to be State Bank of India. So again, this is not the correct option. Option D says again the application should be filed in the month of September, which is not correct. So which is the correct option here? It is option B. 6 months before the expiry of certificate of registration, and the amount has to be received only in an FCRA account of designated branch of State Bank of India, New Delhi. Understood?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Any doubt here?
No, ma'am.
No.
No? Moving ahead. Here. Question number 2. Mrs. C, she puts forth her view on certain expenditures. However, she is unsure about legal footing of her view and related matters described in case study. Which of the following statement is correct? So we'll have to first go to the case study, read it, and then answer it. So here they are referring to Mrs. C. So here comes the paragraph relevant to Mrs. C. So another office bearer, Mrs. C, who is herself an activist, pointed out that legislation has tightened nose around NGOs which is receiving contributions. So they have made rules stricter for NGOs who are receiving any foreign contribution, which makes it difficult for them to undertake any type of transactions and incur certain expenditures due to restrictions which are more stringent, that is, which are more strict with respect to utilization of foreign contribution. She is of the view that expenditure relating to writing and filing reports is directly related to trust's activity of preserving ecology and environment. So the type of expenditure here is writing and filing reports. And she says that this expenditure is directly related to the trust's activity. However, she's unsure about her stand and its legal implication. So she says that this expenditure is in relation to the trust's expenditure. But do you think these writing and filing of reports is an important expenditure, or what type of expenditure is this? In general sense, what type of expenditure will you call this? So first tell me, what is the purpose for which the foreign contribution has been received? The foreign contribution would have been received for the purpose of preserving ecology and environment,
Yes.
because that is the objective of the trust. However, what is Mrs. C saying? She is saying writing and filing of reports is one expenditure which they incur. And she's saying that this is directly related to the trust's objective. However, she's not sure whether she's right or wrong and about the legal implications. She's not sure about whether the foreign contribution can be used for the purpose of this objective or not. Now here, the first point which comes up here is Section 8 of FCRA, which says that any person who has received certificate for receiving any foreign contribution, he shall utilize the foreign contribution only for the purpose for which the contribution has been received. So if I am receiving foreign contribution for a particular purpose, I will have to use it only and only for that purpose. I cannot use it for any other purpose. This point, is this clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. However, now sometimes what happens is there are some administrative expenses also which the institution has to meet. Admin expenses include everything. They also include writing and filing of reports. These are admin expenditure or administrative expenditure. Now, administrative expenditure can be met out of the foreign contribution. However, it should not exceed 20% of the contribution, which is 20% of the contribution. And again, for that, prior approval of central government has to be obtained for it. So let's have a look at the points and let's see which option is the correct option. So option A says expenditure which is referred as admin expenditure. So yes, it is an admin expenditure. The trust cannot defray an amount in excess of 50% of the foreign contribution received in the financial year to meet admin expenses. So no, it is not correct. Option B says expenditure which has been mentioned here is not in nature of admin expenditure. But is this correct? Is it not an administrative expenditure? It is an administrative expenditure, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So
Right.
again, this cannot be the correct answer. Option C says expenditure which is referred is in the nature of administrative expenditure and trust cannot defray an amount in excess of 20% of such foreign contribution to meet these expenses. However, expenses above stipulated limit may be defrayed with prior approval of central government, which means if they want to expend an amount more than 20% of foreign contribution on admin expenses, then for that they'll have to obtain prior approval of the central government. So yes, this seems a correct answer. Option D again says it is not in nature of admin expense. So this is not the correct answer. Moving on to the next question. Which of the following statements is likely to be correct regarding discussion among trust members for proposed transfer of contribution for carrying out its program described in the case study? So we'll again have to go back to the case study and see what it says. What program are they talking of? So Mr. Y also agreed with both of them, that is Mrs. C and Mr. X, and opined that field programs cannot be run without systems and
ஏம்மா நான்
procedures.
கிளாஸ்ல இருக்கேன்.
Field programs cannot be run without systems and procedures in place for supervision, management, policy design, and strategy. He had heard about changes in rules relating to transfer of foreign contributions to other NGOs. So he has also heard about something. He says that there are certain changes in the rules about transfer of foreign contribution to any other person or other NGOs. About 5 years ago, the trust had transferred foreign contribution to smaller NGOs having better reach to the intended beneficiaries of program which is run by the trust. The office bearers were in a fix whether foreign contributions can be transferred to another NGO for running programs of the trust now. So what is this particular point saying? This particular point of the case study here says that they have earlier transferred foreign contribution to smaller NGO and now they are in a fix as to whether they can transfer foreign contributions to other NGOs or not. Now there is section 7 of FCRA which says that no other person who is registered and granted a certificate or has obtained prior permission under this act and receives any foreign contribution shall transfer the foreign contribution to any other person. So foreign contribution which is received, it cannot be transferred to any other person at all. So, option A says foreign contribution can be transferred to another FCRA registered trust. So not possible. B, it again says can be transferred, not possible. Foreign contribution received cannot be transferred to any other person. It is immaterial whether it is registered under FCRA or not. So yes, this seems to be correct. Option D says whole foreign contribution cannot be transferred. However, a certain percentage can be transferred. So no, again, this is wrong. You cannot transfer even a single rupee which you have received in the form of foreign contribution to any other person. So the correct answer here is option C. Moving on. So sometimes what happens is by looking at the names of people which have been mentioned here in the case study, you can go to the relevant past part of the case study and read that paragraph and answer your questions. That is what we've been doing for this particular case study. Mr.
Ma'am,
Z, office
I'm here
bearer.
in number third.
Sorry,
I'm here in question number third. Where the trust cannot outsource the money to
cannot
any.
transfer the foreign contribution to any other trust or any other NGO at all.
Ma'am, in case the trust outsource the work related to the purpose they have received the money, so they can transfer, na?
No, they cannot transfer even in that situation. Whether that other trust is registered under FCRA or not, whether it is working for the same purpose or not, it cannot transfer it to any other person. If you are receiving it, you have to use it.
Okay.
Okay. Mr. Z, the office bearer of the trust, he has approached CA Madhusudan to seek his advice. So, advice regarding modalities of renewal of registration of trust under the income tax law. Which of the following advice? So this is a question based on tax. However, if I discuss this particular question with you, so for the application under income tax law, there's form 10AB which has to be filed, and this has to be done again at least 6 months prior to the date of registration of the trust, which has to be done. Okay. Now moving on to the next question. Yeah. Certification from Chartered Accountant is required by DBS Trust in respect of certain matters under FCRA. Which of the following statements is true in the contest? So for which purposes certification of FCRA would be required? Let's see what the case study says. So the trust has appointed a new auditor, which is CA Madhusudan. Mr. Z is of view that they should consult a tax consultant. And yeah. During the meeting, Mr. Z, he also comes in. He also reminisces that there had been changes in rules with respect to income tax law. However, he wants to be clear. Besides, the trust is planning to sell during financial year an immovable property which is held under the trust. So they are planning to sell an immovable property. And whole of proposed net consideration is to be invested in acquiring another capital asset, which is for, again, charitable purpose. Now, CA Madhusudan, he has also audit account of the foreign contribution and has to certify figures pertaining to the brought forward foreign contribution. And also about utilization of foreign contribution, and all of that has to be done by Mr. Z, who's the, Mr. CA Madhusudan, who's the chartered accountant of the firm. Now, here, what is the question asking you? The question is saying certification from chartered accountant is required by DBS Trust in respect of certain matters under FCRA. Which of the following statement is true? So which of the following statement is true regarding the certifications which are required under FCRA? So under FCRA rules, what happens is every person who is receiving foreign contribution, they are required to submit a report, and the name of the report has to be submitted in form FC4. So the form is FC4, and it has to be accompanied along with the income and expenditure statement or the receipt and payment account, balance sheet for every financial year. And this report has to be submitted within 9 months from the end of the financial year or closure of the financial year. This report has to be submitted. Now let's see what the options are. So such certification forms part of FC4, which is prescribed annual return. So yes, FC4 is nothing but the annual return. It has to be uploaded duly accompanied by balance sheet and statement of receipt and payment. Yes. Which has to be certified by a chartered accountant. Yes, it has to be certified by a chartered accountant. If there's no receipt, utilization, or foreign contribution during the year, certificate of chartered accountant and audited statements are not required to be uploaded. However, submission of nil return is mandatory. So yes, this seems to be a correct answer. Moving on. So certification is required in FC4, which is not an annual return. So again, this is not correct. FC4 is an annual return. Moving on. So point C and point D, they talk of FC2. So FC2 is not the correct certification. It is FC4. So the correct answer is option A. Certification has to be in FC4 and it has to have balance sheet and receipt and payment, which is certified by a chartered accountant. And if there's no receipt or utilization of foreign contribution, which has happened in the year, then in that situation, nil return has to be filed and it is mandatory. So the correct answer here is option A. Is this clear to everyone? So you see, these were a few direct questions. Yes, we did have to just have a look at the case study, however. You see, it becomes very easier when you solve case studies like this. You read the question, go to the relevant paragraph, and then come back and answer the case study. There's one descriptive question also from FCRA. So what does it say? Let's see. It says certain matters have been highlighted in case study which may have ramifications for renewal of registration under the trust under FCRA. At the time of applying for renewal of registration, central government is empowered to make inquiry in respect of wide range of matters, discuss those matters, and do matters highlighted in case study fall among such matters. So we have seen all the matters. We have completely read the entire case study chunk by chunk. So now you tell me, what do you think are the things which have to be kept in mind, or what are the things which the central government would say before providing the renewal registration of FCRA? There are certain conditions which have to be fulfilled. So certain conditions could be like the person should not be fictitious, who's making the application should not be fictitious or benami, or should not have been prosecuted or convicted of any offense, or should not be guilty of misutilization of funds. So all of these things shall be there whenever the government is providing renewal of registration. So I'll just show you the answer to this question. So this is a complete descriptive question for which you have to write a complete answer. Let's just see one point in the case study. So if you have a look at the answer here. So again, the entire thing before renewing, the central government will see whether they fulfill all the conditions or not. What condition? Person should not be fictitious or benami, should not be prosecuted or convicted of indulging in activities which is not good, or communal tension or disharmony, guilty of or diversion of misutilization of funds, not engaged or likely to engage in propagation of sedition or advocate violent methods to achieve its ends. So these conditions shall be satisfied, and only then the government is going to provide in the renewal of FCRA registration. Fair enough. So this was the last part of economic laws. Do you have any doubt anywhere? With respect to that one question which is left, I'll send a clarification in the group itself about that particular case study. Any question, anyone?
No, ma'am.
No?
No,
Are all the
no
case
question.
studies which we discussed, are all the parts of the case studies clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes? I hope it is clear. And now do you feel it is easier to answer questions like this? First read the question, then go to the first read the question and then go to the case study, read the relevant part, and then give your answer. This approach will definitely help you when you are in your exam, because reading the entire case study again and again is not going to help you at all. Okay?
Okay, ma'am. Okay, ma'am.
So all the very best for your examination, and in any In case you have any doubts, you can always contact to us on forums.
Okay, ma'am.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we are going to look at case study 1, which is about cable cabs. Now we don't have to read the entire case study. We are just going to directly look at the question relating to company law, and if required, we are going to look into the passage for details. Otherwise, we are going to try to solve it on our own, based on our own knowledge, as much as we can. All right. So in this, one of the MCQs is relating to Companies Act. Let's look at it. So we have question number 5. Let's read this. Which statement is correct regarding the increase in the number of directors in accordance with the provisions of the Companies Act? Okay, so if you have to increase the number of directors, which of these following statement is going to apply? All right. So first of all, even before we go on to the options, what do you know about increasing the number of directors? First of all, to increase the number of directors, we need to hold a general meeting and we need to pass an ordinary resolution. Alright, so this is an ordinary business. Now, the minimum directors are 3 and maximum are 15 in a public company, right? So, the maximum number of directors that can be increased is up to 15 by passing simply an ordinary resolution. Can we increase more than 15? Yes, for that we need a special resolution. Alright, so this is the provision that we know. Accordingly, let's look at the options. So, option A reads, the increase in the number of directors can be implemented by passing a general resolution in the general meeting. This is correct. But let's look at the other 3 options to see which is the most accurate statement. The company should pass a special resolution in the general meeting to increase the maximum number of directors to 16. Again, this is also correct. The company cannot increase the number of directors beyond 10. Option C is incorrect. Option D, the company cannot increase the number of directors beyond 15. Again, this is also incorrect. Both A and B are correct. However, what is the more accurate statement based on the case? That is the one which we have to select here. So let's look at the case and let's look at the details in the case study to understand what this question is pointing out towards. So the relevant lines here are, currently the company already has 7 directors. Now with the revised strategy, the board of directors desire to increase the number of directors from 7 to 16. Alright. So in this case, the company wants to increase the number of directors to 16. Accordingly, we'll have to select the answer. To make the number of directors to 16, what is required? A special resolution is required beyond 15 directors. So accordingly, whether A is correct or B is correct, so here B is going to be more accurate. The company should pass a special resolution in the general meeting to increase the maximum number of directors to 16. Alright. The next case study we are looking at is case study 12. Okay, in this particularly there is a descriptive question about takeovers, mergers, amalgamation. Alright, so let's first look at the facts of this case. We are only going to look at the relevant facts to understand the question and accordingly answer the question. Alright, so let's read this relevant paragraph. Okay, so M&O Limited has decided to acquire PQR Limited by acquiring its shares. So we've got 2 companies. One is M&O and it's a public company. It wants to acquire PQR Limited, which is also a public company. Okay, so this is a takeover which is happening here. M&O Limited prepared a scheme by which an offer was made to the shareholders of PQR Limited. The offer was made on the 1st of March 2023. The offer remained open for 4 months. Such offer was approved by 92% value of the shares. Shareholders holding 92% value of the shares, they approved, they accepted this offer, they sold their shares to M&O Limited. Alright. Subsequently, M&O Limited gave notice to remaining dissenting shareholders that it desires to acquire their shares. Such notice was given in August 2023. Certain dissenting shareholders, they made an application in the tribunal that acquisition should not be permitted. However, their application was dismissed by the tribunal. Hence, M&O acquired the balance 8% dissenting shareholders. Okay, so what has happened? M&O has given a notice to all the shareholders of PQR that they want to acquire. Okay, 92% value of the shareholders have given assent, they have sold their shares. Remaining 8% shareholders, they were not satisfied. So they went to the NCLT asking that, this acquisition is incorrect. So NCLT refused to accept their application. Okay, so then what happened? Because that application got rejected, therefore MNO simply took over the shares of these remaining 8% shareholders. Now, out of these 8% shareholders, in the next paragraph, it is mentioned that there was a person, Mr. A, who was holding 5% shares. Now, he was very furious. Okay, so he comes to you and he wants to know what he can do. He's thinking of approaching High Court against this whole forceful acquisition. Okay, so what do you know about this whole thing? We have a question regarding this. All right, so here see the relevant section that will be coming into picture is section 235, which talks about takeover. Now this section simply mentions that if the company gives an offer to the shareholders of another company and within 4 months more than or equal to 90% of the value of the shareholders, they agree to accept the offer, then the remaining shareholders can be given notice. Okay, in the next 2 months, the company can give notice to the remaining shareholders that, they want to acquire the shares of the dissenting shareholders also. Now here, if the dissenting shareholders do not want to sell their shares, they can in the next 1 month go to NCLT and appeal and file an application that they are not okay with it. Now here the NCLT will decide whether the shares should be sold or not. Alright. If the NCLT says that there's no point in sending this application, the shares should be sold. In that case, these dissenting shareholders will have to sell off the shares to the company. This is what our takeover section says. So accordingly, everything that is mentioned in these paragraphs, it is accurate, it is correct. Is there anything Mr. A can do? Mr. A cannot really do anything. There's no point in going to the High Court here. Okay, at the most what he can do is, because the application is rejected by NCLT, he can go to NCLAT and file an application. But there's no point. For the most part, as per law, the company has not done anything wrong. Alright, so relating to that, we have got a question. It's question number 6. Mr. A has approached you for advice regarding his concerns. He wants to know whether such forced acquisition of the shares is tenable under law. Is it tenable under law? Yes, we have discussed this. He further wants to know whether he is approaching the right forum. So High Court is not the right forum. At the most, he can go to NCLAT. Now you have to give him the advice. So whatever we discussed, you will have to frame it and write it. Next, we are looking at case study 19. All right. One of the MCQs is relating to company law. It is very basic and it is very repetitive question. Let's look at the question. You will have to give the details of what is X and Y. We have got 4 options: 212, 215, 315, 312. Okay, now what is X and Y? We'll have to look into the case study. If you look into the case study, it's a very repetitive question. X is basically the minimum number of directors that the company can have. Y is the maximum number of directors that the company can have. So please tell me what is X and what is going to be Y. Minimum directors and maximum directors in a public company. It's 3 and 15. 3 is the minimum number of directors, 15 is the maximum number of directors. Simple. Next, we are looking at case study 26, which is about a company which is Manturpi Limited, MTL. Okay, so this is a public company. This is also an unlisted public company. All right. So one of the MCQ is relating to accounts of the company chapter of our Companies Act. Let's look at it. MTL is required to file financial statements in XBRL form as dash, and XBRL stands for dash. Okay. So we have to fill out these 2 blanks and accordingly select the best answer. Okay, so XBRL, by the way, what does XBRL stand for? It stands for Extensible Business Reporting Language. Now, in all the 4 options, you can see it's written Extensible Business Reporting Language. So, basically, the second part of this question is the same in all the 4 options. So, we have to decide the correct option based on the first part of the question, which is MTL is required to file financial statements through XBRL as dash. So MTL is an unlisted public company. We know every company has to file financial statements with the MCA, and some of the companies, they compulsorily have to file XBRL format financial statements, and these particular companies, there is a specific criteria mentioned for them. Alright, so accordingly we will have to select one of these 4 options. Let's read these options, then if required we are going to look at the passage. Okay. Option 1, option A, its paid up and turnover exceeds the prescribed limit, and also it is an Ind AS compliant company. Second, paid up and turnover exceed the limit and it is an Ind AS compliant company. Paid up exceeds the prescribed limit. Last, turnover exceeds the prescribed limit. So accordingly we will have to check the passage to see what is the criteria. Okay. Before we look into the passage, see, in the companies filing of documents rules 2015, it is mentioned that XBRL format is compulsory for which all companies? It is compulsory for every listed company or any company where the paid up share capital is 5 crore or above, turnover is 100 crore or above, or company which is required to prepare financial statement as per Ind AS. Okay. Now here in this particular passage, which of these criteria is being satisfied? This company is definitely not a listed company, we have discussed, it's an unlisted company. Now we'll have to check the paid up and turnover limits to see which of this is being satisfied. Paid up should be 5 crore or more, turnover should be 100 crore or more. So we are going to look into the passage. Now the passage reads that this company is an Ind AS compliant company. Yes, the paid up share capital is 5 crore and turnover is 4 crore. So both of these criteria are actually being satisfied. Alright. So if we look at the options, weirdly there is an error. Option A and B are exactly as it is. Both of them say that the paid up share capital and turnover exceed the prescribed limit, and this company is an Ind AS compliant company and XBRL stands for this. So both of these options are correct. The next case study we are looking at is case study 30. In this, one of the MCQs is relating to corporate and other laws. Let's look at the case study. Let's look at the question first. If required, we are going to jump into the case study. Alright. So question 2. The resolution relating to investment shall be taken as passed by the board of directors in which of the following cases? So clearly this company is making some sort of investment for which a board meeting is held. Now in the board meeting we have to check whether the resolution is passed or not. Okay, when is it going to be considered as passed? Okay, option A says when all 5 directors consent. Option B, when 4 directors consent. Option C, when 3 directors consent. Option D, when the total strength of 6 directors consent. Now we don't know how many directors are there, how many people are attending the meeting. So we need facts of the case first of all. Okay, and then we need to see what the Companies Act talks about it. Okay, so first let's look at the facts of the case. So in the question it is mentioned that some Miss Karthik asked Miss Tina to call for a meeting of the board of directors of the company to consider the investment of surplus funds of 10 crores of the company. Out of the total strength of 6 directors, 5 were attending the meeting. So this is the relevant fact for us. Total there are 6 directors. Okay, in the board meeting 5 directors have come. Now this company wants to make investment of 10 crores. Now if you remember the Companies Act, this is covered in section number 186, okay, which says that if the company has to give any loan, guarantee, security or make an investment, then for that there has to be a unanimous board resolution passed. All the people who come in the board meeting, who attend the board meeting, they have to unanimously agree, then only this investment is possible. Okay, so accordingly we will have to select the correct option. So we know 5 of the directors are attending the board meeting. All of these 5 directors should agree, then only this resolution will be confirmed. So therefore our correct answer is A, when all the 5 directors attending the meeting consent to such investment. The next question we are looking at is from the case study 36. Now this case studies a question which is relating to company law is exactly the same as we just now discussed from section number 186. Okay, let me look at the question first. Which of the following statement is true with regards to the resolution taken by the board meeting to acquire the property in Goa? Again, here the company is acquiring a property. That means the company is making an investment. The board of directors have held a meeting. Now, when will the resolution be considered as passed? When all 5 directors agree, when 4 directors agree, when 3 directors agree, or when all 6 directors agree. Okay. And now in the case study, it is mentioned that 5 out of the total of 6 directors were present in the board meeting and they passed the resolution. Okay, so this is the exact same question as we had discussed. Section 186 is applicable when a company gives loan, guarantee, security or investment. Then in that case, all the directors present in the board meeting should pass the resolution. Only then this investment can be made. So here all these 5 directors who are present in the meeting should agree. Okay. So accordingly option A is going to be correct. All the 5 directors should agree. The next case study is case study 35. Question number 4. Okay. So WTL shall appoint another women director on the board of directors of the company on or before. So simply here we have to see by what last date the woman director should be appointed by the board of directors. So for that we need to know when she resigned, etc. So issue 4 in the passage is relating to that. Let's read it. So Arunima was the woman director. Due to her other engagement, she tendered her resignation from directorship with effect from 1st March 2024, vide her letter dated 15th of February, which was received by the company on 20th February. The board took note of the resignation by the meeting which was held on 15th of March. So there are so many dates. Okay, so she wrote that letter on 15th February. In that letter, it was mentioned that the resignation is effective from 1st of March. She gave that letter on 20th February to the company and the company held a meeting, board meeting on 15th of March to address this. Alright. So, when should the next, up to what date should the next women director be appointed? So, here the relevant section is section 149 which says women director should be appointed up till the next board meeting or 3 months from resignation, whichever is later. Okay, so board meeting is held on 15th March. Okay, 3 months from the date of resignation, that means from 1st of March, that is March, April, May, June, so that means the second date becomes 1st of June. So it's 1st June or 15th March, whichever is later. So 1st June is our later date. So up till 1st June, the company should appoint a women director. Accordingly, we'll have to select the correct option. Option A 1st June, B 20th May, C 15th June, D 15th May. Correct answer here is A. Okay.